Hi everyone, Simon from Horoma Studio. Today I wanted to have a look at a small project of an extension I did for a competition that we won for a client. And that kind of went well. It's a very simple extension, very interesting architecture, and I'll just walk you through the simple process of like this sort of point of views that I proposed, what we went for, and how the project evolved. But it's going to be a very simple teardown, nothing super fancy, but I'll try to put here and there some tips of how and why the composition ended up being that way so that you can maybe incorporate that in your own project later. So yeah, let's start. So yeah, let's get started by just having a quick look at the final images. Here. So this is like the main image from the garden side. So the idea was to have this extension for a sort of like office space and sort of like restoration space for like administratives in Strasbourg. So very simple, cool view, nice color palette. I'll have a better look at it in a minute, but overall, this is the idea. And the other image was this one that was more on the, the street side with like the tramway thing, people cycling, the existing building, and the extension that we could see on the left in the other shot. So again, very simple image. Some stuff can be improved, of course, and we'll have a look at that. First, let's see the sort of point of view proposal that we went through at first. So here was an image, like the final image is taken from that spot and looking that way. Here it's like perpendicular to that spot, but as you can see, it's not the most interesting because this is like not the extension looks very tiny, even though it's actually quite big. So this was not very worth exploring more. This is a bit closer, so you have like a better understanding of what would happen inside and have the relation with the other extension that is more on the street side, but still not very compelling. This one is kind of the one we went for in the end, which I think was very like super simple, but super straightforward and very interesting because you do have an understanding of the interconnection between this part and the upper part here. You do have a better understanding of the sort of transition from that extension to the inside of the existing building and the sort of lobby, bar space, etc. You can sort of like understand what's going to happen here because we can suggest it later. The distance makes it sort of easy to suggest material, which is also a good thing. So that was a quite easy choice, I think. Here it's more like some research for the outside space. This one wasn't that good because we don't really see any of the existing parts. So this is a bit like you don't really understand how it's gonna work with the project. This one could have been potentially interesting, but it was a little bit static maybe, even though this could be fun because we were working with this sort of like stone material. And this idea of like all the sort of like administration, etc. The fact that we have this interesting tram line that was going that in the foreground here. So potentially by like reorganizing the vegetation, because here it wasn't really organized, which is like for like just simple purpose of like understanding some massing. They could have been something that could have been interesting, I think. This one is kind of closer to what we went for, but the angle is slightly different. And the fact that we were cutting this a little bit earlier was actually maybe not that good of an idea. This one is quite close. I think I'm not even sure of like what's the exact number of the one we went for in the end. But this one was quite nice because we start getting interesting reflection options from the angle that we have. We still suggest all the different types of openings that we have. We understand better the connection with the existing, etc. So this is a very good option to start from. And this is kind of a not very interesting option that could have been explored, but really didn't, because we had like this other pavilion here, but it was kind of irrelevant, or like really secondary in the overall project and program. So let's start with the street view here. This was the first option. or first iteration, if I may say. You can see that most of it is already in place. There was some stuff that were not very good. I don't know why these guys were early in the process and I kept them even though they're actually not that good. But yeah, overall there was like most of the changes were done. As you can see, if I go to like version 2 here, well, actually you don't even see the difference. Some elements were changed for sure and like detailed. This is here, there was like a small, you can see iteration because we were wondering if we were keeping the shutters or not. In the end, we didn't keep them. There was also quite a bit of detailing on the project itself, adding the shutters, etc., like blinds behind. One thing that I can see if we jump straight to the final image is that there is still some things that I'm not really happy with. So let's have a look at that. In terms of people, I think there's something a bit wrong with like these guys. I think they're not very helping. I would have gone with something different. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that, by something, at least maybe people walking in rather than being stopped like this would have been a little bit better. Maybe as I was suggesting here, maybe people like more interacting with the fence and like just waiting or whatever. This guy here is fine. Maybe I wouldn't have put it exactly on that side. These guys here crossing is fine. The cars here are okay. One thing that wasn't really properly done is the transition between the background and the foreground, or like the background and the 3D basically. Here it would have been nice to have like a little bit of motion blur, like to have it like slightly further and have it with like a bit of motion blur. There was also, like, you can see the sort of haze that is nice, but at the same time it make it a little bit hard to understand the sort of differentiation in between each of those trees. So this is something I'm not really happy with. One thing also is maybe the sky is a slightly bit too saturated and the colors of the trees are a bit too dull overall. Here for some reason the vegetation is super what's the word, saturated. Oops, sorry. And also one thing that is annoying is that for some reason the forest back object was not very properly like tweaked. So, and this, I think that's one thing that it could have been nice. For some reason, I don't know, I have like all these leaves here on the edge that is quite nice, but I think I could have played actually with more leaves in the foreground here in order to sort of dress up the foreground and have something slightly different. One thing also that I actually don't really like in terms of small detail is the fact that, when you have like this very small line of light in the foreground, I think it would have been slightly better to orientate the sun in a slightly better way so that I start with like dark area, then have maybe something a bit like bright here. But here the distribution of light and shadows is actually not the best. And especially because I think it comes from the metro or tramway, sorry. And something I think I already had in mind that I wanted to try to create, but that maybe I didn't manage to, or maybe it's what we see here, but I'm not sure. That could have been fun, is to have light going through the tramway in order to have this sort of interesting second light or like indirect light going through the windows of the tram. So this is some like small details that could maybe have made this sort of big foreground with shadows a little bit more interesting to, not to look at, but make it a little bit more interesting. Like it's a bit like having like caustic effects from like reflected windows, etc. So this sort of thing. Beside that, I think the overall like feel is very nice and the color palette is okay. I wouldn't change it. I think there's like, for some reason, very like shitty looking edge here. I really don't know why it ended up looking that way. Why not? But I mean, like there's many reasons why not. So yeah, this would need to be fixed. And you can see like the transition between like this very low resolution and blurry part and this more like good looking part. Here you can see there was this attempt at having like the tramway stop, but for some reason it doesn't feel like it because the people are not really placed properly. Here you can see there's a sort of fuck up with the layers of the guy that's going over the car. So there was like small details like this. It's very okay because you can see in terms of big picture that the center of attention is really around here because your greatest area of contrast is around that area, and people are kind of like going kind of in that direction. Maybe that guy should have been actually, these guys should have been in the foreground so that you sort of look that way, and this guy should have been here so that you sort of go back that way. Maybe that would be a way to sort of fix the sort of weird feeling I have when I look at the placing of people in general. But beside that, there was also this sort of like a little bit of motion that was introduced with this idea of like trying to suggest wind in the image, and how like those dead leaves could be flying around a little. So overall, this was a good image. It was just like some small things that needed refining. The asphalt texture was very nice, I think, because it adds like a lot of interesting small texture and reflection, and this is very important to always have something that has like a bit of variation in the asphalt, because it gets once it's like a very simple seamless texture, it gets very boring if you have like a whole street in your image. So you have to always be careful to use like interesting textures for that. So that'll be it for this image, and the other one that is for the garden. This one is interesting because, as I said, it's very straightforward and simple frontal view with like two main elements that you can read. There was like the two main points on this one was basically a work on the vegetation and work on the reflection, because what you want, basically the whole narrative of the project was this idea of creating this nice glass house in the middle of it's like literally a very, very nice park in Strasbourg. So if you want, like, the idea that on how to emphasize it was really to have like the camera in the middle of the vegetation. So we played with like very strong foreground, lots of depth of field, but still like a lot of vegetation suggested. And then it was more about the reflection of the surrounding and having like a nice reflection of all the trees that are around. Here it might have been like we could have pushed it up a little bit more because it's maybe a tiny bit subtle. So that would be one of my main critique on this aspect. Again, the hue, or maybe just the saturation of the sky is a little bit too much. Maybe it could have been worth it to have a little bit of clouds here and there. This area is nice and looks very light and nice looking, so that's good. One thing is that I think there's a good balance between seeing the project and not seeing it too much, which is a good thing. Here we have the same problem with our spec, that the edge was not properly, like not in the right edge mode. So you end up having this sort of weird, like round looking edge that is very not nice. And that when you look at it from that direction, it's okay, but still it's like details that I do notice quite often and that I sometimes fix and sometimes I don't fix it, because for some reason, sometimes for a spec will crash if I put it in edge mode. So I haven't really figured out why this happens. One thing also that needed fixing here, I think that could have been interesting, is to suggest maybe a little bit better, maybe have like an interior lighting a little bit more accurate and warmer, in order to maybe have the exterior being like quite cold and neutral, the middle part here and the extension being slightly warmer, and have like an actual different, much warmer atmosphere in this bar area here that is in the old building. That way we would have had a sort of more interesting gradation of like 1, 2, and 3. And this, I think, is the slightly, like this small thing that is a little bit lacking. But beside that, I think the image was very convincing. And well, as I said earlier, like we did win the competition. So this is basically the whole point of this image. So they did the trick. But that is the one thing I think that is interesting. So yeah, as I was saying, very simple projects, quite straightforward approach, but this is something that will happen every now and then where everything kind of falls into place very quickly, because it kind of like the point of view that will work, the lighting that will work, the framing that will work, and the overall composition that will work is very it's straightforward and kind of makes sense very easily, and it becomes very easy to sell it to your client and make sure they are on the same page as you are. So in our case here, it was like, that's why the video is a little bit shorter, is that everything was quite in place in terms of like the broader aspect of the images. There were of course like small details that would need refining, as I was saying, like some light elements and like the managing of shadows and things like that. But overall, there were like very minor things that won't completely change the overall feeling that you get from when you look at the image. And this is the one thing I think is very important, is that one thing you need to focus on every time you're working for a client or even on your own project is that you want to have a very clear idea of what you want to show in the project and how you can show it in the best and most straightforward way, I would say, or at least the clearest way. And then you can start adding details. In our case, for the exterior view of the street, it was really this idea of like how the existing and the extension are like interlocking, and how you have like a lot of animation in the street, and the garden space was more about like really this sort of like glazed space, and how the reflection is like very interesting, how you have like the extension working together, and especially playing a lot on this sort of like the very ubiquity of the vegetation around us. So this is why like the camera is in the middle of the vegetation. Most of the palette is like in green area, green shades, etc. And this is like, once you have those two very strong directions, all the rest is kind of okay if you don't do it properly, because when it comes to like small details, this is stuff that maybe your client will perceive, that you will perceive for sure, but the end client will not be really aware of that small type of details, and they will be more like sensible or sensitive, to the big picture that you're selling. So as long as this is like on point, there's basically no problem. So that'll be it with this teardown for this set of images, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, bye.